All right, so what I'm doing here is sort of the part two of my processing. So the first part I did like 3 months ago. It's basically how to stretch in Surreal and use Graph Expert. So basically that's what I did here. This is a different picture than I was working on 3 months ago. This is the Horsehead Nebula. All the data is acquired by me. It's about 7 hours of data in Bortle 8.9 using an Antilla tri-band filter. So I use Graph Expert. I also use the new version of Graph Expert. Actually, it's not the new version. It's the beta version, which has deconvolution in it. So the first thing I did was ran it through Graph Expert to get rid of the gradient, to denoise, and also deconvolve now. And then I brought it into Surreal, and I stretched it using several stretches involving using the Grant General Hyperbolic Stretch. Anyhow, so now I pull it into Affinity, and it looks pretty good, but it's a little bit dull, right? So we're getting it to pop a little bit, and I'll show you what I do. So the first thing that I do is I use James Ritson's free astrophotography macros. So I'm using version 18. I haven't checked to see if he released version 19 or 20 yet. I downloaded version 18 a couple months ago. It was the newest one like 2 months ago, but he might have released another one since then. So every time he releases another version, the macros change a bit. So they might be slightly different if you're on a different version than I have, but it's a free macro and they're awesome. So I suggest actually giving him money. I've given him money twice already because I use it so often. But they're technically free. You don't have to pay for them. So yeah, you load them into Affinity. And then I know which ones work for me because I've experimented with a lot of these. So I have a certain workflow. In fact, I made a macro for it. But I actually don't. So basically, there's a certain subset of macros that I use all the time. So I figured, why don't I do a macro of the macro? Just to automate the ones that I already use. The problem with this though is that it works, except it does them all at the same time, and it's actually more beneficial when I'm stretching nebula and galaxies, or not stretching, but post-processing them, to actually do them one at a time to see how each one affects the picture individually instead of having them all done at the same time. So even though I made this macro, I don't actually use it anymore because it's too many adjustments at once, and I like to do adjustment one by one. So this is what I like to do. You can play it with all these things, right? I mean, they're non-destructive. So if you don't like what a particular macro is doing, you can just turn off the layers. I'll show you. So it doesn't really hurt your picture at all to just play with these things. But like I said, I've played with a lot of them and I know what works for certain things. So I'm going to show you my personal workflow, but you can develop your own workflow just playing with these macros. So the first thing I do is for most things that have some blue in them, I do cool blue tones, so that makes this a little bit bluer, like this, this, and this. See if I turn it off and turn it back on, so that's what I like. You can also adjust the opacity, so this is basically how strong the effect is. So instead of just having it binary and being on or off, you can also keep it on and then just like turn down the effect, right? Or turn it up. But I like it all the way up for this particular image. So that's cool blue tones, which is here. Then I do warm red tones. That might be a little bit too much, so I'm going to hit the opacity slider and just bring it down to taste. It's whatever you like. That's pretty good. Then I like deepen red tones. Now this is going to be way over the top when you first hit it. You're going to have to adjust the opacity. So I'll show you. So it's kind of cool, but it makes everything, of course, too red. You know, everything is red. There's no more yellow, basically. So I'm going to turn that quite a bit down. To maybe like 3%. I'm also doing this edit a little bit quicker than I normally do. So I kind of go, you know, fine tune these things a little bit slower. But just to make the video go quicker, I'm going to do these adjustments a little bit quicker than I normally do them. Yeah, so that's the first three things I do. And then I go up to boost blue-green detail if there's some blue-green there, which there is. This stuff. So I'm going to click this. I'm going to dial that back a lot because blue also shows up sort of in the background. It's kind of as noise. So I don't want that. I want a little bit of it, but not that much. Something like 5%. And then I do enhance red yellow detail. If there's red or yellow in there, which of course there is for this case. Again, that's too much, so you're going to want to dial that back again. All right. Something like that, maybe. Then I go through most of these color things. I do enhance yellow signal. That enhanced this a bit. It made this a little bit more orange. I might dial it back a bit, but the effect wasn't really that much. So I didn't change it that much. And then I do enhance cyan. That's going to enhance the cyan and these things. Okay, also enhance the cyan in the background, which I don't want that much. A little bit's okay, but not that much. So I'm going to dial it back a bit. Of course, you can do a mask if you wanted to mask these regions out, but I'm just going to leave them in there. Again, it's a quicker sort of edit than I normally would do. But yeah, that made this pop a bit. I'm going to skip blue, but you know, you could do blue too. It's going to make these things more blue, which I don't want, but you know, you can experiment with it. You can turn it off. If you don't like it, if you don't like a certain effect, you can just turn it off, right? It's no big deal. Then I'm going to do enhance red. This is going to be way too much again by default. So again, I'm going to dial that back. Okay. And that's basically what I do to start. I go through all the color stuff down here. Then there's one more color thing I forgot, which is deepen color detail, which I'm going to do after enhance DSO luminosity. So enhance DSO luminosity to make everything brighter. It's going to make it too bright and you're going to lose color, as you'll see. So it's nice to enhance things, but it made things too bright and you lost some color detail. So I'm going to bring that down a bit to like 25%. Then you do deepen color detail, which basically makes everything deeper and more vivid. It's nice, but it's too much. So I'm going to dial that back again. So it's already looking better. Now, whether it's your style or you want to do it some other way, it's up to you. But I like, you know, to get as much color as possible. And some people don't like that. Some people like it more subdued. So whatever your style is, but this is what, you know, what I do, my personal style, personal preference. The next thing I do is usually skip most of this stuff here. Again, you can play around with this stuff if you don't like it. Like you could say, okay, what does weighted saturation mask do? Hit it. If you don't like it, turn it off. If you like it, but you need to turn it down, just turn it down. Or just turn it off. It doesn't really affect anything. You know, the next thing I personally do is go up to highlight brilliance. This is, I think, an important one. What it's going to do, see, if you zoom in, you can't really see much detail in here, and that's because we made the colors more bold, and we enhanced the luminosity. So that kind of got rid of some details here, but I find highlight brilliance brings back a lot of these things that get buried in the background. So I'll show you this. See? All this stuff got brought back. I can turn it off, turn it back on. I usually use the default setting. I usually don't adjust it. Sometimes I adjust it down a bit, but I kind of like this if I zoom out. Yeah, I like that. It made this a little bit too bright, but it's okay. So we're making progress here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this is what I personally do. Again, this is my workflow. You can do your own workflow, but this is what I do to get my images. I merge all the layers here into visible when I'm done with my initial play around with the colors and the brilliance. Then I copy, so I'll just show you here. I copy this merged visible layer, and I go new from clipboard. So sometimes what I do here is I adjust the levels at this point. You can't really adjust them. So what do I mean by that? I mean the left end is on the left-hand side. There's no extra room here to bring the black point over. So I'm not going to do that right now. I'll do that later. And then the next thing I do is clarity. So actually, let me do that again because I didn't show you where that was. So you hit this timer down here. First of all, you have to have the layers active, not channels or brushes or anything, layers. Then you hit live filters and then go to clarity. Clarity helps on the... So what I'm going to do, clarity helps to make things sharper. So what I'm going to do is a little bit to make everything a little bit sharper and leave it like this, like 5 to 10%. And then what I'm going to do is copy this, duplicate. So you right click here, hit duplicate. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, they're both the same thing because I just duplicated it. So I'm going to take one of them, doesn't matter which one, because they're both the same thing. And I got to release it. So it brings it up here. Then what I'm going to do is crank it up quite a bit. And what I'm looking at is how the detail in this stuff improves. The flame, the horse head, and all this stuff over here. Okay, I'm going to dial it back a bit. Okay, that's what I want. Now, everything else is too sharp. Like all the background here is too noisy because I made the clarity too much. So what you're going to do is right-click. Well, actually, the easiest way to do it is select that clarity layer. Right, so I just did it again. Go to Layer and Invert. Okay, so that just inverted it. So it got rid of it completely. Then what you do is you take a paintbrush, which is over here. Make the opacity like 30 to 50% and the flow like around my numbers here, right? And then make this white. So you come over here to color. Make sure it's not on histogram, make sure it's on color. And select the white dot there, circle. And then what you can do is adjust the size to be whatever size you want. I want it to be a little bit bigger. And then you just paint over the things that you want to be more defined. So it's not going to show up right away. I'll show you in a second here. I want all this stuff to be more defined. I want this over here. I want the flame. Maybe this. Okay, so let me show you the difference. And my opacity is down because I don't want to apply too much of an effect right away. So you basically have to paint over these areas a bit to get more of an effect. Otherwise, if you put the opacity to 100%, it can affect things too much at once. So I like to do it like a little bit at a time, and therefore I turn down the opacity. All right, so let me turn it off and turn it on. See? See the difference? So that made things more clear. Then what I do next is I also have James Ritson's astrophotography macros, which I already used, but I also have his sharpening macros. That's another thing I grabbed from him. And then I use his sharpening macros to further sharpen. So the first thing I do, I turn this into a hand again so I can pan and accidentally don't draw on it with the brush after I'm done, using the clarity. And I do structural contrast. So I'm going to hit this. It takes a few seconds, and let me show you what happens. See the difference? It made the bright areas brighter. Now it's probably too much, right? So I got to turn it down a bit. Let's see that. All right, so that's looking a lot better. Then I go back to the pixel layer and I do local contrast, enhance local contrast. Now this doesn't really work that well. So I basically have to turn it down a lot, but I like to use it just a little bit. Yeah, see that looks horrible? See, I turn it down usually to like 5 to 10%. It's a subtle effect, but I'll show you the difference. It just makes the dark areas a little bit darker. Just a little bit. I don't use it that much. It's usually 5 to 10%. And then I do enhance depth and contrast. And I usually turn it down. So that makes everything pop a bit, but it makes it pop too much. So I usually bring it down to somewhere between 25 and 50%. Let's see. Yeah, that's good. Then I sometimes do bandpass sharpening regular, or fine, depending on the picture. Now this sometimes makes the picture too sharp and it starts introducing extra noise. So I try it. If I don't like it, I just turn it off. But you can try it, like I said. So let's see what happens when I do this. Yeah, it made it, too sharp. It starts introducing artifacts a bit. It's nice, but it's too much. Let's try turning it down quite a bit. Let's see. All right, I'll use it a little bit. All right, now when I'm done sharpening, I also merge all the visible layers. Again, this is my process. You can kind of work within the same document, but I like to, just so I have a nice flow, I like to do the color stuff, merge visible, do the sharpening stuff, merge visible, and keep on working like that. So for some reason, sometimes merge visible takes a while. Sometimes it does it instantaneously. I don't understand it because I do the same thing every time. Like it's the same number of layers basically every time I do this. And sometimes it does it right away. Sometimes it takes a while. But what I'm going to do is copy this merged pixel layer. Again, go to new document so everything's sort of organized. Then I'm going to do, actually I should have done it before this actually. Actually before I do that, I take this merged pixel layer and I save it. And the reason why I do this is, I'll show you in a second, but let me save it first. So I save it as a TIFF, and I call it the same name that I just was using, which is this picture here. I just put like an A at the end of it, just so it's a slightly different file. Now, exporting, again, sometimes is instantaneous, and sometimes it takes a while. I don't quite understand it. Usually exporting takes about as long as it takes to do merge the visible layers. Again, sometimes it exports quickly and sometimes it doesn't. I guess it's maybe related to the RAM that I'm using. If other programs are open, I don't quite know. Okay, but the one filter I use that isn't free is Topaz Denoise. And the reason why I saved it is for some reason, when I used the original picture from Cyril, and I copy it like I've been doing, I can't use Topaz Denoise, it's grayed out. So to get around that, what I do is I save it as a new file, like I just showed you, and I open up that new file. And this is another thing that takes some time. It's trying to sort of reorganize all my folders and files in this Astro directory that I have. And it takes a while. But let me see if I can just search for it. All right, here it is right here. So I'm going to open this. And now I can use Topaz Denoise. So it's kind of a weird bug, but I think it's a bug. I don't understand why. Because it's literally the same picture. These two things are literally the same thing. But for this picture, I can't use Topaz. And for this one, I can. It's a little bit weird, but whatever. All right, so people say that you shouldn't use Topaz because it introduces artifacts. And I say no. If you're careful with it, it does not. Okay, so let's zoom in here. All right, so you can argue maybe this thing here at the top of the horse head is an artifact. So it looks slightly different, but it's not that much different. It's just smoothing it out, right? To me, it's not creating things, right? As I have it here. Like, it's smoothing out all the things in the horse head. But it's not making new things. At least I don't see any new things. I'm going to turn up the sharpness, though, and see if it does make new things. See, I don't see any new things, right? And by the way, I use severe noise all the time, which is the least aggressive of all these. And again, so these like lines here are here. It's not new lines. Most of this stuff is here. Like this line here is the same as the line here. All this stuff is just smoothed out. I don't really see any major difference. Like I don't see it introducing things that aren't there. If you use severe noise. Let me turn it up a little bit more. All right, so this thing here might be interpreted as an artifact because it's not that strong here. This little white spot. So when it starts doing that, I turn it down a bit. All right, you can still see it there a bit, but I don't think it's that bad. I mean, you could argue, okay, that is an artifact, possibly. Like possibly this line here. Like if you really zoom in, there's a little bit of a line here that isn't really here. It's a little bit here. I mean, you're kind of nitpicking. I don't really see it introduce a whole lot of artifacts when I use it. All I see is it smoothing out the noise and sharpening some things. Let's go over here. Yeah, it's just making this sharper. Again, I don't see any artifacts if you look close. Like there's nothing new. Like all this stuff here is just sharper. Let's go over here, see how it smooths it out. Smooths it out. Again, I don't see any artifacts. I don't see anything that's introduced that wasn't there. Again, maybe this little thing on the top of the horse head is a bit, but it's subtle and I don't mind it. So I hit that. It normally doesn't take this long. I just switched modes on my computer. Uh-oh. It might be locked up. All right, let's see if I can close just Topaz. Did it do it? Yeah, I think it did it, right? Because if I go edit, undo plugin, yeah, it did do it. All right, so, okay, so I don't know why that happened. Okay, so it looks pretty good. It looks pretty sharp, smooth out. Now, I do want to make it a little bit more contrast, so I'm going to try to adjust the levels again. Now I can adjust the levels a bit. I'm going to just bring it over a little bit into the blue. Clipping the blues a bit, but I don't mind doing that. And I might adjust the curves later on. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Let's merge this down. So I'm going to merge it down right now. Actually, then what I'm going to do is copy this layer again. So this is a new trick that I've learned recently. Do new from clipboard. Then what I'm going to do is do frequency separation. All right, so let me do that again. So you go to filters, frequency separation. Drag this all the way over to 100 pixels, hit apply. Okay, now what I'm going to do is turn off the low frequency. This is just the high frequency. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm going to apply a sharpen filter, a unsharp mask. So what you're going to do is play around with the radius to sharpen some details. So you don't want to do it too much. Play with the radius and the factor, by the way, or all these things, right? Until you get something that looks good. But so what you can do is hit this split view button here, and this is before the right-hand side, and this is after. So it's just some subtle sharpening, but I might... You don't want to like turn it up so you're getting artifacts, but just a little bit of sharpening. Okay, good. Hit apply. That just sharpened the smaller details. It might be over sharpened a bit, actually, that I look at it, but it's okay. This is just the general sort of tutorial. Okay, so if you want to sharpen details, that's a good way to apply some extra sharpening. Then what I do is I duplicate the low frequency layer, and I go to screen. That sort of enhances the background a bit. It gives it sort of a hazy look, but I'm going to turn that down a bit. Something like this. I usually turn it down to like 15 to 25%. That just gives a little bit more stretch to the background. I'm going to actually duplicate it again. And I like to do a color dodge, which makes the colors pop a little bit more. That's a little bit too much though. So of course I'm going to turn it down again. I usually turn this down to between 10 and 20%. It's whatever you want to do though. Then what I'm going to do is duplicate the high frequency layer. And this gives more contrast. Again, that's too much. So I'm going to drop this down usually to like 10 to 15%, just to give it a little bit more contrast. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. So it's looking pretty good. I still want to get a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to merge visible. Again, when I'm done with the major portion of editing, I merge visible, copy, the right click, copy, the merge pixel layer, and go new from clipboard. It's just how I work, just to organize things in my head. All right, so what I'm going to work on now is getting it a little bit more contrasty, getting the darker areas a little bit darker, and possibly the lighter areas a little bit more bright. So of course you can do that with a curve. So you hit this thing here, adjustments, hit curve. click the picker. So I'm going to move this over. Click the picker, pick a dark spot, like here, and drag down with your mouse. So it's going to make the dark spot darker. Hit the picker and pick another sort of bright spot, which is maybe here. And click, left click, and then move your mouse up. Okay, that's too much, but we can adjust that. So it's nice, but it's too much. So basically, I'm just going to adjust this down a bit. Okay. Now, if you, let me just show you something quick, and I'm going to undo it because I'm not going to want to keep this in there. If you adjust this back to 100%, and you say, okay, the flame is too bright with the curve adjustment and made it too bright. But you like everything else. Everything else is fine, except the flame is too bright. What you can do is click on the paintbrush again, make sure it's black, and then you can actually paint over the flame. And when I turn this on and off, you see the flame. Well, I got to do it more because the opacity is down, so I got to go over it a bit. Let's do this some more. All right, so now, if you notice, if you just pay attention to the middle of the flame, it did not get brighter. The rest of the image got brighter, but it did not get brighter. So that's something you can do if like everything looks good except for one little part. You can paint over the part that you don't want in black. So that's a cool trick. I'm going to go back to undoing the paintbrush. It should undo it. Okay. Back to here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just drag this back down. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, one thing I might do is make the flame more yellow. I don't do this in every single picture, but if I want to make the flame more yellow, what I do is I go to HSL under Adjustments, which is Hue, Saturation, and Luminance. And I'll click on yellow, then I'll click on the picker. And I'll adjust the hue so it's more yellow. Yeah, so I get it go to left so it's more yellow. That of course makes everything more yellow, which we don't want. I'll show you how to get rid of that. So after you do the hue adjustment, you invert the layer. So invert it, goes away. Do the same trick we did before. Take a paintbrush, make it white. I think it's white. Pretty sure it's going to be white. Make it white. Paint over the flame. You might want to adjust the opacity down even more. So you subtly bring the color back. Because if you do too much opacity, there's too much of a color difference on the edge of the flame, and it looks kind of weird. So you paint it in gradually. All right, let's turn it on. Yeah, see? Now, you might say, okay, that's too yellow, or it looks too weird. You can click on the layer again, and you can further adjust it. Like, it's at -14, so I'm going to note that, but you can make it, yeah, see? If you do that, it looks too weird. So you got to do a subtle adjustment, but you can make it more saturated. You know, make sure it's not looking too weird, but I think that looks better. It might be too yellow. Let me see, because it's not really that yellow. It's slightly yellow. Maybe something like that. Yeah, whatever. Again, the edges might look a little bit weird. Like on the edge here, there's a transition to yellow. You just gotta feather it in a bit. I mean, if you look at it, you know, you got to be like, it looks a little bit weird because you've done it, but I don't think anyone else is going to notice it, to tell you the truth. Okay. All right. So, okay. So now I'm going to merge this. Again, I'm going to copy the layer. I just like doing this so I have things sort of compartmentalized for each step. Go new from clipboard. Okay, now I'm going to open my star mask, which is here. All right, so I have a macro that I use for the stars, and I'll show you what's involved in the macro. So I made a macro from James Ritson's macros for my stars, as I'll show you. Okay, so what these macros are is basically some of the things I showed you at the beginning with the color for the nebula. It's enhanced red signal, enhanced cyan signal, enhanced yellow signal, cool blue tones, warm red tones, deep in color detail. These are all the things that I showed you already. There's one more, which is remove star fringing, which is, I forget where it is. It's somewhere here. Here. And then what I do is I adjust these down quite a bit. So I just basically go like 50 to 70% on most of them. Because it looks cool, but it's a little bit too much. For yellow, I might drop it down to like 30%. Cyan's got to be maybe like 50%. Red, I'm going to drop down. Because it makes the... if you have these up all the way, the orange and red star is going to be too bloated. Same thing for the cyan a bit. And deep in color detail, I usually go down to like 70%. You can see what these things are doing if you click them on and off. All right, then I merge this into a visible layer. I copy that, so I'm just going to go Control-C, which copies, or you can right-click and then copy, same thing. Bring this to the starless image, Control-V to paste, and then on the star layer, hit Screen. I like using Screen. And there are the stars added back. And it looks pretty good. Now, I might want to make it a little bit more contrasty, a little bit darker background. So sometimes what I do is a quick way to do that is reduce background luminosity. So I click on the Starless layer, hit this. It's a bit too much, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. I want to use it a little bit, but not that much. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, that's a pretty good picture. Then what I do is on the stars, right, the star layer here, I actually run Affinity, sorry, not Affinity, Topaz Denoise. And I use low light. So if I use what I used before, it makes the stars a little bit too weird, so I use low light. And it's a little bit less of an effect. And by the way, I'm barely doing anything. The remove noise is at 1. Sharpness is at 0. But what it does is it sharpens up the stars a bit. See these stars over here? The original looks like this. With Topaz, it looks better in my mind. So it sharpens up the stars with low light. 1, 0, and I actually have the recover detail pretty high. So it's barely doing anything, but obviously it's doing something subtle. And then that's it. Yeah, so that looks pretty good, actually. It's probably one of my better edits. Even though I was doing it quickly, it's a pretty good edit. So then I merge visible again. And I export the final version as a PNG. So you can do a TIFF or PNG, but I like PNG. Save it, you know, obviously whatever you want to save it as. But I already did a few versions of this. So I'm going to save it as another version, and that's it. And you're done. So again, you can basically go through all these macros and see what works and what doesn't work, and just play around with it and develop a workflow on your own. But the basic idea is that James Ritson's macros, both the astrophotography ones and the sharpening ones, were great, as well as using frequency separation. And then the trick that I have is using Topaz Denoise for denoising and a little bit of sharpening. That's what I do. All right, so that's the end of the video.